On the 7th of September, we have the Personal Branding Mastery Masterclass by Deepan Sidhu. Registration is mandatory again. Please check your chat window for the URL for registration. Go ahead and do it right away. Now, please check out our international certification in User Experience Flex, a time and location independent program. You can scan the QR code on your right-hand side. We are thrilled to announce the Norman Scholarship for the same. The first 25 people to apply will receive a scholarship of rupees 25,000 each. Of course, you need to take an assessment. Good things don't come that easy. So this is a wonderful opportunity which you don't want to miss. So please go ahead and check it out. You can scan the QR code and you can find the URL on your chat window as well. Once our speaker for tonight presents her views, we will open up for questions. So you can scan the QR code on your left-hand side and keep your questions ready. Please make sure to ask your questions on the LinkedIn thread. This QR code takes you to the LinkedIn thread dedicated to our speaker tonight. In the chat window, we may miss out on your questions. So we will definitely try to cover as many questions as possible. So scan this QR code and keep it ready. You can find the URL on your chat window as well. And the most interesting thing is that the best question asked in tonight's session, the person will win a digital learning course. These digital learning courses are valued from say $99 to $199. So this is a great win. So make sure that you ask the right question and you win the right prize. Coming to tonight's session, we have the pleasure and honor of having with us Bhargavi Sankara, our star speaker for tonight. Bhargavi is a senior business executive with more than 25 years of outstanding experience in managing all aspects of technology. She is fondly called the chief disruptor. We will get to know why that is so. And she heads corporate technology at BNY Mellon. Bhargavi, without further ado, let me hand this session over to you. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So I wanted to just check, the video seems to be disabled. Is that intentional or like I'm not able to turn it on?
Let me check that.
Okay, now I can see my video. So this is fine. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, let's get started. And those of you who are not speaking, if you can mute yourself, that will be helpful. So the first and foremost is when you think of product development, what comes to your mind? What are some of the products? I wish we were doing it like in a in-person kind of session. So I would ask you from that experience point of view. So when you think of products, what is important is feedback loop from customer. So why is that so important? Like you can come up with a product design and you might think, wow, this is awesome. I'm sure customers will love it. And there are ample examples where all those beautiful product designs didn't really fetch revenue, didn't get the customers' delight. So as an example, I think Samsung, I can't remember if it was Samsung or some other company that started a refrigerator long back with a lot of features where pretty much, you can kind of watch a video on top of the refrigerator. You can increase or add, what is going to be your shopping cart, what all do you need. And it would be, leveraging some AI ML aspects. So there are many things that they designed, and then that refrigerator did not get sell. So it wasn't sold as easy because customers didn't really want all of those features in that one single product and have to pay that kind of premium because they had existing solutions that they wanted to fit in or integrate. So bottom line is, when you think of product design, it's extremely important to have a term that I use called progressive elaboration. What do we mean there? Progressive elaboration is where you kind of show customer, this is how it's going to look like. you won't actually build the entire functionality. You can actually have mock-up screens. You can have, some sample test data that gives a user experience that you can quickly validate whether it is working or not. A variety of things that you can do to get quick feedback. And then slowly, as customers' reception goes and they like certain features, then you start to introduce more and more features. That's what progressive elaboration is all about, which means that if you have a product that is going to take 2 years before it comes into the market and you think you got it all right, then maybe, you might miss the boat. So you need to really have an ability to have ongoing iterative releases. And how can you release often? You can only release often if you have significant amount of automation in your engineering process. So basically, it comes down to a few things. DevOps is so earlier world, what used to happen was you would have product managers or business analysts gather the requirements. And then you would have program management team, which would formulate functional requirements. And then you would have dev team, which would do high-level design, low-level design, and actually build the code. Then you would have a test team that would do the test. And then finally, it would get launched into production, and then operations team used to provide support. And these were like completely siloed, disparate functions. So that used to lead to a lot of translation errors as it moved from one pipe to another. And sometimes also it used to cause issues of sending half-baked product to meet timelines, which means you're not really optimizing per whole. So Menka, I see you're asking for, would you like to share your slides? Unfortunately, I can't share my slides because I'm actually, I can probably try. I have to see how it works, because then you won't be able to see me. I can probably, because the problem is like from
That's
my
okay.
network. Yeah.
No
okay.
problem. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, so bottom line is you need to have an ability. So in this scenario, where you used to have each team completing their part and then they ship it over to the next team and then they ship it over to the next team, like you're not really optimizing for whole, because a developer is only focused on his piece and tester is only focused on his piece. And you know that tester is going to spend some time testing the whole thing. So you're going to wait to finish some more of your code cleanup because you know that you will have that time window. So therefore, the whole point is it leads to wastage. And so in DevOps, we also call as lean principles. So people follow, you might have heard about Agile, but lean is a methodology that originally started in manufacturing industry. And then later on, it has been adapted to software. And you can look up, there is 7 lean principles for software development. And there's also 7 wastes that you should avoid when you're building software. And the waste could be, handoffs, like too many handoffs. There are many other things that, we can go through. But bottom line is, when you are thinking of DevOps, basically, you don't want these silos, and you're actually having development and operations work together. And like it doesn't even have to be 2 discrete roles. It could be the same developers that take end-to-end responsibility. In fact, in the best view of DevOps, and before BNY Mellon, I used to work in Amazon earlier, and in Amazon, DevOps was one of the most mature in the industry, and it still is. And so there, what we used to have is that the developer carries a pager. Once if you are managing a team size of 8 people, once in 8 weeks, it's your turn to carry the pager, which means you are providing production support. Now, obviously, developers don't want to stay awake, so they will not have tech debt in their product. So they will make sure they're fixing issues so that their same issues are not repeating again. So So DevOps is basically a set of development practices that combine software development and IT operations to shorten the SDLC while delivering more features and updates frequently, closely in alignment with business objectives. And I'm just telling you the description of it. But bottom line is you want to have more frequent releases. And to be able to do that, we call it in DevOps CAMS, culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. And some other teams call it CAMS, CAMS, culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. And they don't talk about lean, but bottom line is it's all four aspects are important. A lot of times when you come across some of the people in industry, they are not totally aware of DevOps and they only focus on the automation and they only talk about the tool chain. They don't talk about entirety of DevOps. But actually, if you ask me, the area where you get the maximum benefit is when you look at the culture piece of it. So we'll talk about each of them in a minute. Give me 1 second if you don't mind. So what do we mean by culture? So in case of DevOps, when we talk about culture, it starts with basically ownership mindset. So you don't think of like, this is the only thing I own. This is the only part that I have a decision to make. You actually think of it from an end-to-end perspective of how it is going to make a difference to customers. So which basically means that you try to understand customer journey. So I told you about the refrigerator example that failed miserably. So that failed because the developer was not aware of the persona that is going to use the product and how it integrates with that person's life. All products have to be designed with the perspective of how does that simplify customer's life? How does it simplify customer's journey? One of the classic examples that we used to talk about in Amazon when we think about product design is like saying, like, you might have used some doors, right, which have handle on both sides, but it says that you have to push on one side and pull on the other side, and they would have put some piece of text on the door. But people keep banging the door because they actually should have pulled, and instead of that they're pushing. So bottom line is that's not an intuitive design. Intuitive design would be where if you don't have to pull it, you don't even have the handle as an option. So you just have it like, the ability to just push, right? And I'm seeing some of the questions there. I'll come to that in a minute. So bottom line is the design has to be intuitive. Design has to be integrated in the person's day-to-day life. So as an example, I'll talk about one more example. When I was in Amazon and I was building systems for transportation, one of the systems I was building was driver on the road assistant. So this is actually, as you deliver packages to end customers, they carry a handheld device on top of which Dora is the application that's installed that helps the driver give point-in-time instructions so he can deliver his package most effectively. For me to be able to understand really and make sure that this product was built right, I actually hand-delivered these packages. So there is no substitute for first-hand experience of how a product is going to be used. And only then you'll be able to build really awesome products. Now, anyways, coming back to, I was talking about culture, automation, and measurement and sharing. So in culture, the first and foremost aspect is the ownership mindset, where you really are not just building to the specs, but you're actually thinking about how is this going to improve a customer's life and customer's journey. And so that's where, like, you wouldn't have a customer go through 10 clicks if the same thing can be enabled with 1 click. And if no click is required, take it off altogether. This is this classic example of, when iPod was being designed. like Steve Jobs asked, like, why do you have these buttons? Like, and then basically he removed the buttons altogether, and you could actually pretty much, put your finger and you will kind of automatically scroll. And it's like always you're further simplifying. So we thought when iPod was coming into picture, that you could listen to so much music in one single small device, which was a big shift from a Walkman. Now, right? So the same thing, people don't want to even have that, accessing a device. They want to instead go to Alexa or, some other device, OK Google or something else, because they don't even have to look for the device. You just have to say it, right? And it will play the music that you will want. So any product design is about simplifying, about understanding the customer and making it very effortless, very intuitive. That's what it begins with. And you do it with that ownership mindset and understanding who are the key personas that are going to use. What is a persona? Persona could be like, if you're building for a school system, it could be a student, could be a persona, a parent could be a persona, a teacher could be a persona, and every one of them has a need for a different kind of information, and they need different kinds of insights, and they need different kinds of entitlements. So that's the first aspect. And then also the other important aspect is all the design that we build nowadays, we build it with the idea of, earlier when we used to design products, we used to say that if it can last for next 10 years, or next 5 years, then it's good. And we would like it to scale up to at least 10 times. We used to think like we can easily grow up to 10 times the user base. But think about it now. Like, do really customers think that, their product will only be limited to 10x the users? Like, with the prevalence of social media and mobile and like any product, especially if you're building for B2C, you just have no way of predicting like how many fold a customer base can grow. And so for which you will automatically be thinking of building cloud native solutions, which means that they have to be solutions that can horizontally scale. So when you think about that, you're not thinking of kind of building a system that will never fail, because you assume that it can fail. And so you design for failure. What does that mean? So let's talk about it for a minute. So let us say if I'm designing for failure, and let's say my application is on a fleet of, on a load balancer of 5 instances across 2 availability zones, then even if one of them fails, one instance fails, it should automatically create one more instance so that the customer himself is not impacted. So in DevOps, what that means is that you have monitoring that can monitor any failure in real time. And we call the term smart alarms. What that means is that, like, if one of the instances underneath the load balancer fails, if we cut ourselves a SEV2 ticket, but at the same time you have a script that automatically instantiates the new instance. So basically end user is never impacted. He still gets the same performance, but you analyze this data later on to see how can I prevent it from happening in future, right? So the whole idea is to be able to detect an incident before an end user detects, and to kind of help create self-healing scripts or recover faster, right? So these are the things that you focus on when you are designing for systems. Now, unless a developer cares for his customer and understands what are the business metrics that are going to be important to him, for instance, that a page load time should be less than a sub-second, or an order processing has to be within certain time window, or it should not have a dip of more than 10% order volume. Whatever that business thresholds are, you need to be monitoring and you need to be configuring, and you need to be able to make recovery steps faster. Similarly, when you're rolling out the product, you want to be able to test the new features with a select set of customers and get their early feedback before you roll it out to a larger population. And that's what is, you use a term called blue-green deployment. And so basically, you kind of give it to a smaller subset of population and you validate how customers are responding to that feature. And if it's all going good, then you roll it out to everybody. That's called blue-green deployment. So these are some of the things that we use as techniques when you think of DevOps, but I was so far only talking about culture. Now let's talk about automation. In automation, what we focus on is the entire continuum, entire tool chain. For instance, first of all, you will want to capture the requirements. Typically, Jira is used for requirements capturing. Then you have, and Jira is an Atlassian product. Then you have basically the code, version control system. Most commonly used is GitLab and GitHub. Then after that, this whole thing is in a pipeline. And now GitLab 12 has very good pipeline that you can integrate all the different steps that you would like through the YAML script. And basically you have aspects of traceability from requirements all the way to the code. And then you will have unit test coverage that's automated and coverage measured through SonarQube. And then you will also have the Baracode or some other scanning tool that helps you to get security aspects of it, to determine the vulnerabilities and fix any related defects. And then you get into, kind of rolling it out to your QA environment and doing the various performance testing, stress testing. And then you kind of roll it out into production. And when you're rolling it out into production, again, whether it is getting deployed to a container like Kubernetes or, App Engine or whatever container you use, or you kind of go into VM-based deployment. In any whichever case, all of these aspects are end-to-end automated. And what that allows you in the process is like you can do deployments multiple times a day. And I remember seeing one of the questions as to what are the measures that, so I was talking about culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. That's what DevOps is typically about. So I spoke about culture briefly, and now I spoke about automation, which is mostly around the toolchain automation and also monitoring of the production environment. So what are the measures? Measures are always customer-centric. We're only focused on outcomes, and we're not focused on outputs from each of the process steps. So what are the outcomes? So at the end of the day, what does customer care? He wants the features come faster to him, which is basically innovation, the speed of innovation, also referred to as faster time to market. And it happens through having more number of deployments and the deployment time itself reduced. If you don't have deployment time itself reduced, a lot of quality time from developer is lost in the process. So that's the first one, faster time to market. The second one is, first of all, you should have reduced failure rate. And how will you have reduced failure rate? Because you have become so good, like that every process step has quality thresholds, like meaning I will not push code into production if it does not meet 80% code coverage. I will not push this code into production if I have any SEV 1, SEV 2 critical vulnerabilities. I'll also not push this code into production if it does not pass the smoke test criteria, so on and so forth, right? So all of those, because these gates are there, you necessarily ensure that you are catching defects sooner than later. And also there is a term that you might have heard, which is called test-driven development or behavioral-driven development. So those are two different things, and I'll talk about both of them briefly. TDD focuses on a component level or module level, and BDD focuses on end user. So end user's behavior and how is he using the product and stuff like that. So basically what we used to earlier call as user acceptance test criteria, that used to come later in the cycle. Now in a BDD or TDD kind of model, you start writing the test cases even before you start writing a single line of code, which means that everything you're writing is verifiable. And so that helps you to reduce the failure rate, right? And now BDD or TDD, both of them is also again about a mindset shift. You're thinking about how is this product going to be validated? If someone says, hey, it needs to be fast, what does fast really mean? Should it be in within sub-seconds or whatever that is, right? So those are the things that you will be thinking upfront when you're thinking about requirements definition. Now, so first of all, so the failure rate should be coming down. And more importantly, then once, should there be a failure, you should be recovering faster. And so there is this beautiful book, if you haven't read, you should read, which is called Accelerate. Yes, there is another thing that I just heard. Sorry, a question on the screen which said, do you use value stream mapping? Yes, we absolutely use value stream mapping in DevOps. Why do you use it? For those of you who don't understand, value stream mapping basically looks at the entire process and tries to see every step, is it adding value or not? If it is not adding value, you try to say, let's remove this step altogether and see what is it causing. So you then automate. So first of all, you reduce steps if you don't need it, and then you automate as much as possible. That's how you get to a process that's more robust. Process should only serve the purpose of improving an experience to your end customer. And so there's no point having a process step which basically does not add any value. So again, going back to the DevOps measures, there are two things that we focus on: faster time to market and better service and reputation. And faster time to market comes from increasing your number of deployments and reducing the deployment time itself. And better service and reputation comes from reducing the number of failures and improving your recovery rate. Overall, all of this leads to lower total cost of ownership. This is picked from Accelerate. There is this organization called DORA, DevOps Research Organization, and they publish this annual State of DevOps reports. And these are the 4 measures that they look at across industries to see if somebody is really, using DevOps, and where are they at this point? Are they elite or are they novice, or whatever stage they are in? And the more elite customers have, the more elite practitioners of DevOps have 208 times more number of deployments compared to people that are not following DevOps. 106 times faster deployments. So these are some of the measures that came from Accelerate. I'll come back to questions. I'm seeing a bunch of questions and main cover, and it's like 15 minutes left. Ask me to pause and then we will get into questions. I see a lot of questions coming up. So I spoke about culture and I spoke about automation. I spoke about measurement. And in case of culture shift, major culture shift is like people without DevOps tend to worry about change, introducing a change. So therefore, you see a lot of companies that go into change freeze window because they don't want to introduce new change during a critical window. And so from there, they go into this change velocity. I mean, like basically when you have very strong, mature DevOps team, you absolutely know, and you're not hoping for hoping for a good quality, you actually have quality that you can predict upfront. And operations have a lot more automation. And you actually, instead of kind of focusing on perfection, I remember this in one of my previous product companies, not Amazon, but before that, where we used to have this lengthy test cycle, because we used to say we need to get to a 99.99% bug-free product. And without really understanding what is it really solving, because by the time you complete all the cycles, that features might itself be stale in the market. So you want to be delivering, but you want to be able to experiment faster by getting faster feedback loop. Faster feedback loop can only come from being able to produce the code into production more often. And you cannot do it without automation. And you cannot do it without having some of these best practices of blueprint deployment or canary deployments. So that's another thing that I wanted to call out. Let me just touch upon a few more things, then I'll open it up. So now the question that a lot of times people ask is DevOps only suitable for certain kind of applications and not suitable for some other kind of applications? As going back to what I said at the beginning, if you think of customer first and you want to have faster feedback loop mechanisms, and you want to make sure you're okay to have not completely done product, but incremental releases, so you can get faster feedback again. When you think of all of these things, there's nothing that it says that it has to be a certain kind of application. Of course, if you have a microservices architecture, you have an ability to kind of isolate where a problem is coming from, as opposed to a more monolithic kind of application. So there are also, when you have to release a more monolithic application, there might be a lot more testing that you need to perform before you roll it out into production. Whereas if it's a smaller componentized application, you can test the incremental features that you are delivering, and you can also continuously improve the code coverage. So there are benefits to certain architecture types. Having said that, using DevOps principles, if you go back to the 4 outcomes we spoke about, can definitely reduce your deployment time. You can still improve your code quality and other things to reduce the failure rate. Yes, the ability to deploy more often may be still limited because of the business maturity, maybe because of the dependent systems that you have to test and all that, and the cost of just the cycles that a mainframe might spin out, that you won't do it all day long. And so there are some of those limitations. So your outcomes may not be same uniform as another application that might be using microservices architecture, but you will still gain some benefits. Not all of them, but you'll still gain some benefits. So I say that everybody should aspire for leveraging DevOps, because the whole mindset changes, because you're focusing on customer first, you're focusing on customer's experience first. You're also focusing on how do I get faster feedback mechanism from the customer. And also, to the extent that you can automate, and again, using principles of value stream mapping and kind of looking at how do I eliminate steps that are making zero sense, and kind of also have this whole notion of developer having rotational responsibility of production support, which also makes sure developers understand firsthand how the product is being used, so they can fix the issues better, and they can actually innovate better for the customer. One of the trainings that I attended in one of my previous companies used to be called Customer Connections. Another one used to be called Side by Side, where I actually used to observe how a customer is using our products. And that helped immensely in terms of designing solutions. So those are some of the best practices that we have in DevOps and net. When you try to introduce this in an organization, initially people get excited because it's cool thing to do. It's what everybody's doing. And also initially, as soon as you start focusing on automation, you'll see that teams get very excited about it. But as soon as the automation increases, then you start to realize, for instance, there are tools which help you to compare between different teams, and you start to see how miserable you look like because your code coverage really is not that great. So that kind of takes you a little like into a bad kind of feeling. But then people start fixing it, and then you go through that hunch, and then you kind of have major jump in productivity. That's kind of what I had in mind. But let's see some of the questions. Minka, how do we want to do these questions? Do we want to look at, like, one of you will read out the questions to me and then I'll answer, or do you want me to look at the
So, Bhargavi, I think you have already taken some questions from the chat window. So please feel free to take anything from the chat window. The rest of it, I will read out to you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you properly.
Can you hear me now?
No, but I'll be able to see the comments myself, and I'll try to.
Yes.
I'll take a look at the chat window and see all the questions.
Sure.
Let me answer from there. How can the persona and culture be combined for DevOps transformation? So first and foremost is, like, you have to box your customers into categories of personas. So, like, for example, in one of the companies, we identified across the company what are the different personas that will be using our products. And so there were like 6 personas. Usually people with good user, any company which is focusing on digital transformation, they look at the personas that they're serving. So it could be like I said, a student, or a colleague, or a manager, or a candidate that is applying for the company, and so on and so forth. There are various personas. So each persona, then you try to understand what are their behaviors, what are they going to be needing from our products. So you observe their day, like day in the life of a customer or day in life of an employee. So you actually try to understand what they're doing, and in what they're doing, how does our product integrate. And so when you think from that perspective, then you start to think, okay, my job here is not to build engineering or build a fancy looking product. My job is to make it intuitive, easy to use, effortless, and optimize customers' time. And that's kind of it. Like, you actually want to kind of make it easy to use and constantly innovate on it with the technologies that are available to you. All the time also thinking about, okay, if we create a feature, is customer willing to pay for that kind of product? So you need to understand all these things, and it's not just a product marketing guy's job. That's what is it like when an engineer understands customer better, he builds better solutions. I already spoke about the metrics. Like, the metrics are those 4 things that the DevOps measures. Is like, how fast am I delivering features? And then besides this, there are other measures, like, like I said, it could be like for a e-commerce site, it could be the number of transactions it is processing, or number of orders it is processing per second. How often are you meeting a shipment promise? whatever, those are like business metrics. I'm talking more from an engineering perspective. There are 4 metrics. How often am I releasing features? What's the deployment time? Is it reducing? Am I reducing the failure rate? Am I improving my recovery rate? So those are the 4 measures. How do you build ownership with oneself? That's a very good question. It does not come like as a byproduct through DevOps. Actually, this is where many product companies, when they are hiring, this is a leadership principle that they find out during the interview process. So let's talk about it for a minute as an example. Now, if you're a small-time shop owner and some customer comes to you, how far will you stretch yourself to meet that customer's demand? Compare that to a big brand store and you're just a manager or shop owner in that, a shop salesperson. How much will you stretch yourself? So for that person in a big branded store where he's just doing a job, he might not have the same ownership as a small-time merchant. So the ownership mindset usually is tested even as part of interview. Like, for instance, when I was getting interviewed at Amazon, the question was, one of the questions that I remember very clearly was, let's say this is your first day on the job and you get a call that the system is not working and we're not able to apply labels automatically to the packages. Now, what would you do? And I was trying different techniques. I was telling him, I'll do this. It eventually, and he kept throwing more and more roadblocks. And in the end, it came to a point where I had no other solution available to me. And I said, I'll just go to if there is a school nearby or some other place where I have ample number of resources, I'll go and I'll ask them to come over and I'll give them some money, but I'll start applying it to all the packages manually and still deliver the packages. So these questions that people ask, which are scenario based, they try to judge, how much are you acting with a sense of ownership? How far will you persevere? When will you give up? So this is what they're trying to find out. Now, the next question is, I feel there's a gap between theory and practice. So how do you encourage UX research and ownership mindset in companies? In other words, how do you convince your team to value these concepts? So like I said, it all starts from top down, but more importantly, it's also certain sessions are conducted where people are given explicit experience, like I said, customer connection. So I used to actually sit next to a customer service representative. I used to have this headset to listen to their conversation, to understand the feedback that the customer service representatives are receiving, and so to see what exactly is the gap between what we have thought as the usage of the product versus what really is happening on the ground. There are many such coaching that is available to create empathy in an engineer so that people can really understand this mindset shift. So I don't think it's a convincing game anymore. I think it's a survival strategy. You absolutely need to understand your customers really, really well. There's no other way you can build better products. Should we also look at reliability, scalability, agility, security? So I already spoke about security, right? When we talk about DevSecOps, as part of that, the whole idea of running scans real time is to understand if there are any vulnerabilities and you need to address them. So DevSecOps is where you're left shifting the security aspect altogether. And when I spoke about ops being monitored and ops, when you're deploying, like having all the thresholds identified and all that, that actually helps you to monitor real time as in when you're deploying a new feature into production, how is it impacting existing performance metrics? So therefore, if there is a problem, you have a rollback strategy. And again, rollback scripts are also automated. So everything about DevOps is focused on reliability. That's number one. Number two, in terms of scalability, I mean, like, it is not necessarily a product of DevOps itself, but like when you think of DevOps, mostly these days, every system that is being built is built for cloud native. And I spoke about that briefly. And cloud native is all about building system that can horizontally scale. And I spoke about an example where underneath the load balancer, if one of the instances is not working, how do you automatically create new instances or flip over to another availability zone and so on and so forth. In terms of agile development, that's where I spoke about progressive elaboration. Lean is also similar principles. So those are some of the things we spoke about. Value stream mapping, absolutely, we need to be doing it. Principles, processes, and people. This is another term. I mean, you'll also come about terms like people, process, and technology. But DevOps talks about CAMS: culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. So I like, again, people, process, technology, principle, process, and people. These are all different terms, but DevOps is primarily focused on CAMS. So there is this interesting question about mind sharing. So one thing for sure in DevOps is about automation, autonomy. DevOps is all focused about autonomy, which means that manager has to be more of a coach, which means he also has to have hands-on knowledge about the systems that he's building so he can coach appropriately. And he's not like your traditional manager who's like very hierarchical and order giving kind of person. So DevOps is all about autonomy and giving more empowerment to teams. DORA is like you can Google up, it's basically a consortium of various DevOps practitioners, and they publish these ongoing metrics, and they also share some of the best practices. I think it's founded by people from Google. At least some of the initial people are from Google. So those are some of the questions that I see in chat window. I'm not sure if there are any more questions. Menka, can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me? Bhargavi, there is one question here.
Yeah.
From Saravanan. Is the upgradation of DevOps system has best practices with less human intervention? So let me paste this question on the chat window, so it will be easier for you.
So DevOps best practices with less human intervention through proper automation validation to say that it can go upgrade or not, and provide list of instructions, then get upgrade with no breaking on completion. Wow, that's an interesting question. Yes, it is about automation for sure. And also an ability to validate while you're rolling it out. Actually, there is also a term called intelligent or cognitive DevOps, which also focuses on being able to predict. And the prediction comes of leveraging past data. So you can, like, you don't wait till end of a product development cycle. You kind of know, even as you're progressing, how likely the product is going to have, what is the defect density that it is going to have, what is the likelihood of meeting certain timeline and stuff like that. Or because you also have this, from an ops perspective, you have like historic data, so you can predict when you need to scale out or increase your fleet size or other aspects. So how far? Wait, I just saw one more question, and before I could read it, it disappeared. Let me just open it up. So sandbox server is just one of the terminologies, but bottom line is like blue-green deployments is very common. You don't usually try to give access to sandbox servers to end users, but when you're deploying it itself, you can deploy it to there's two terms that we usually call it: canary deployment or blue-green deployments. Canary deployment is where you kind of deploy it to one box or one region, and then you see how it is impacting, and then you scale it out to the broader ecosystem. Blue-green deployment is where you're kind of giving access to a new set of features to a select set of customers, and then you're kind of scaling it out to other customers. How much accuracy can, how accurately can you predict? It all depends on how much historic data you have. But if you have like at least a year or 2 years worth of data, you can pretty accurately. Actually, I would ideally say at least 2 years worth of data helps you to bring in a lot of predictability, because you start to see the improvements and you can kind of accurately judge. What type of task does ops explain in DevOps? So ops is like basically production support, which has to do with things like any incidents like L1, L2, L3 kind of incidents, like, hey, my system is hanging up, or my system is performing slow, or I'm not able to place this order. All of these incidents, they come through operations team. So that is one area where in DevOps, developers, when they carry the pager, they also understand this, so they can then realize which particular component is causing most issues, and they go address that root cause kind of thing. So that's what DevOps helps in. Now, the other parts about what does the ops team also do is like actually deploying your code to final production, which is more like system reliability engineering kind of function. So that can be completely automated, where you can kind of have the Ansible scripts for deploying to a VM, or you can also have App Engine deployments or Kubernetes deployments that are completely automated. And there you will again kind of try to monitor all the outputs from each other process step to see if you're meeting the thresholds, and only then you get a free pass to deploy it into the final production. The other thing that the production support team or the operations team also looks at is like, the CPU usage, memory usage, and stuff like that. But those kind of things are completely automated now, as well as any dependent systems and how are they performing. So you will be able to monitor a wide variety of systems. How should mindset shift happen? Yeah, so mindset shift, how will it happen? Like, there's both top-down enforcement and bottom-up coaching that need to happen. If there is no top-down sponsorship, people will continue to do things the same way because there is never really a necessity to do it differently. So I remember in Microsoft, initially it was, waterfall or iterative or quarterly releases. It's actually with Satya that they changed it, right? So they started to move towards DevOps mindset and DevOps methodology. When they started to do it, they still had like large development teams, large test teams, large production support teams. And after a few more quarters, they just said, okay, we're not going to have these roles anymore. They started reducing the roles like testers and production support roles. And so basically, developers then essentially had to grow the muscle and broaden their role. So that's kind of how it happens. That's the top down, and bottom up is where you have the coaching and also bring in some people that really have been change agents, and they kind of help bring about some of those conversations. And then early successes also breed faster leveraging of some of the best practices.
Great. Thank you, Bhargavi, for such a lovely session. And there have been some wonderful questions as well. So, for the lack of time, we have to call for a wrap right away. And thank you for this very insightful session. I'm sure that Indy's got some real actionable insights and got to clarify a lot of the questions that they had in their mind. And please keep your questions coming on the LinkedIn thread, and we will try to, provided that Bhargavi has the time, we will try to get it answered. And meanwhile, Bhargavi, please accept the certificate of appreciation from us. So we have created a dedicated web page for you where the recording of this session will be available. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.